cause that be natural.
Lady
I ain't
D.
looking tacky. I keep my game tactful.
Yo.
Yeah, I'm so nappy.
M.O.B.
Cause that be natural.
The infamous.
I ain't looking tacky cause I keep my game tactful.
I'm so pretty, I'm so fat, boo. I'm so natural, it's like it's a taboo. I'm so filthy, got the tattoo stuck in these bitches like I own ragu. On my business with my platoon, getting these minutes like I'm a typhoon. Y'all this jersey on that cartoon and I'm sitting on top.
Hey guys, and welcome back to Afros and Baby Hairs, and thank you for joining me once again in the reading room for book review number 20. Today we will be discussing Murderville 2, The Epidemic by Ashley Jaquavis. So if you're interested in details of this book as well as my thoughts and opinions, then please stay tuned. I am not and do not promote this book to anyone who is under the age of 18. If you are under the age of 18, please get your parents' consent and or supervision before reading this book. Now that I've gotten that out of the way, let's get into this book review. So I'm going to start off by reading the back of the book. With Samad's target on their back, Liberty must survive the harsh streets alone. But when a chance encounter pushes her into the arms of a new friend, Poe, the two take on the California kingpin and step full force into the game. As bullets and sparks fly, the unlikely pair embark on a serendipitous journey back to where it all started, Sierra Leone. With the new overseas connection, Poe sees an opportunity that is too good to pass up. When his pursuit of the American dream conflicts with Liberty's past, will they be able to survive, or will the drug empire that they built together come crashing down? So now I want to introduce you to these new characters. We have Poe, who is a local dope dealer, Scarlett, who is Poe's deaf girlfriend, Rocco, who is Poe's right-hand man, Mr. Blue, who is Samad's old connect and Poe's new connect, and he's a black guy. You have Sasha, who is Samad's old connect and Poe's new connect, and he is Russian, and his wife Claudia. You have Castro, a Mexican kingpin and the leader of the Los Familia. You have Little Mikey, a greedy young worker of Rocco's. You have Dahlia, who is Liberty's cousin from Sierra Leone. You have Omega, who is Dahlia's husband and drug lord, as well as a connect that Poe will get affiliated with. You have Zulu, who's Omega's connect. You have Ayo, the leader of the African Goons. You have Bowers Enders, who is the police commissioner for the city of Los Angeles, as well as Castro's brother-in-law. You have Tiny. This is a local crackhead that sells chicken dinners to the crew. You have Ahmad, who is a diamond buyer in NYC, and Mr. Hunter, who is a diamond buyer in Michigan. So this book starts off with a thug attempting to rob an apartment or house or townhouse, something like that. He tied up a beautiful 22-year-old woman whose name was Scarlett. He beat the woman because she would never tell him where the money was. The goon took it as disrespect that the woman wasn't, telling him anything. It was like she was ignoring him, and out of anger, he choked her to death. Soon thereafter, he noticed the woman's high school diploma on the wall that read Michigan School for the Deaf. Guilt overtook him, and he fled the scene empty-handed. Now, this particular goon had been watching Scarlett's boyfriend, who was Poe, come in and out with duffel bags, and this goon was watching him for a period of time. So anyway, the next pointer is Poe, who was Scarlett's boyfriend, was a pretty big time drug dealer who had been working overtime because he had just purchased them a home and was ready to propose to Scarlett and get her out of the hood. He had just went and bought the ring and was on his way home from a long day of hustling and was ready to surprise his queen. However, when Poe got to the house, he noticed that his girlfriend wasn't in the den where she usually sit to wait for him. So he ran upstairs figuring she was asleep. Upon going upstairs, he noticed that the place was a total wreck. Then he saw his girl still confined to a chair, beaten and bruised, and her lips had turned purple. So of course she was already dead. Liberty was still laying next to Shy when she was awakened by the hospital pager that was given to her. They had been waiting for an entire year for the pager to go off, and she was filled with joy. However, when she tried to wake Shy, there was no response. Liberty eventually called 911 when she saw that Shy wasn't breathing and his body was cold to the touch. Corner, a month had passed and Poe was visiting Scarlett's grave. He told Scarlett that she didn't deserve any of this and that he would find the goon who did this to her. Upon leaving, Poe got a call from his right hand, and he called to tell Poe he had info on the goon that ran up in his spot. Since Poe had put 50 stacks on the goon's head, the streets were talking. Anyway, Poe's right hand, Rocco, was standing in front of the goon's mother's house, and he told Poe that word on the street was the goon had left town. Poe gave Rocco an order to make him come back to town. They hung up, and Poe headed to the hospital to pick up the rest of Scarlett's things and to sign the donor paperwork, since Scarlett's family was killed and he was the only person who was left next to kin of hers. Liberty had already had the heart transplant a month prior, and on this particular day she had a follow-up visit with her surgeon. She got her exam and was given a prescription. She left heartbroken, still mourning Shy. As she walked down the sidewalk, a man in a black hoodie began to approach her, and then a truck with tinted windows slowed down. When the window came down, she saw Samad's face. Obviously, Shy didn't kill him. Samad had been looking for Liberty for years. A masked man stuck his body out of the window holding an AK-47 pointed directly at her. She was afraid. She dropped her purse and waited for her death. Corner. Chapter 1 started with the whole entire scene playing out from when Liberty was a child and her village was attacked. We were able to go into more detail about how everything happened. Soon thereafter, Liberty was back in reality, waking up from a nightmare. She was at a motel with Poe. Once Samad's goons started firing in front of the hospital, Poe ushered her into his car and took off. They ended up at a hotel. He was trying to get answers out of Liberty as to what kind of stuff she was into, and she was trying to figure out what he was into, so she didn't give him much info and lied like she didn't know who the shooters were. She didn't trust Poe, but she appreciated him. They laid low for the night, both grieving their loved ones in silence, and the next day they went their separate ways. Poe went to his old spot and saw that it had been broken into. He rushed in to check his safe that was located in the basement. However, when he got to it, it was open with nothing inside but a note telling him that if he wanted his money back, he would have to bring the girl to him, which was Samad. At that moment, Poe was angry because that was the money he had saved to start his life over and took him forever to save. He also realized in that moment that Liberty had lied to him. Either way, he was willing to do whatever it took to get his money back so that he could leave Michigan behind. Poe ended up telling Rocco about his dilemma, and Rocco's advice was to turn Liberty over to the man who wrote the note so that Poe could get his money. Poe really didn't want to because he felt like it was something about Liberty that reminded him of Scarlett. Poe ended up devising a plan, then headed for the bus station because he knew he would find Liberty there. When Poe made it to the bus station, there Liberty was sitting on a bench with 3 hours of wait time until her departure. She was actually alarmed when she first saw Poe's truck pull up, thinking it was Samad. But once she saw Poe, she was actually happy to see him. He ended up offering to drive Liberty to Arizona, and she accepted. However, in the back of Poe's mind, he was really trying to take her to Los Angeles to Samad. The address was on the note Samad left in Poe's safe. Either way, Poe and Liberty headed off, talking for hours until they made it to Colorado. They ended up getting a room and talking all night. They eventually fell asleep with their clothes on. Poe ended up driving into California and on to Samad's estate while Liberty was asleep. When she woke up, they were already past the guards at the gate, so there was no turning back. Samad paid Poe an extra $100K plus the money he had taken from him. Guards dragged Liberty into the mansion as she begged and screamed. Poe ended up asking Samad what was he going to do with Liberty, and Samad told him the details of the torture with a deranged look in his eyes. Poe knew then that Samad was a sick monster, and as he was leaving, he was devising a plan to save Liberty. After Poe checked into a hotel, he booked his childhood right-hand man, Rocco, a flight so that they could begin to rescue Liberty. Meanwhile, Samad had stripped Liberty naked and tied her to a bed and gagged her. He tortured, whipped, raped, and urinated on her for hours. The next morning, when he was well rested and ready to start the torturing marathon again, Poe and Rocco had entered the estate under landscape workers' disguises. They entered the mansion and they followed the muffled screams. There they found Samad sodomizing a tied and gagged Liberty. Full of bloods and whelps and covered in urine, they were able to get Samad's safe code from him before giving Liberty the honor of blowing Samad straight to smithereens. She emptied the clip on him. Soon thereafter, they unloaded the safe into some available luggage Samad had. Poe and Rocco about the safe Samad had in his office. They packed up everything, including Samad's black book, and loaded into the van where they had the Mexicans that were there to actually do the work. They had them duct taped in the back. Once they were off Samad's estate, they ditched the van and went to get a penthouse suite overlooking the city. Rocco and Poe decided to set up shop in LA instead of returning to Detroit, and they cut out a third of the money for Liberty to start her life. The next morning, Poe gave Liberty her cut and found out about her scar and her heart transplant. He thought he was tripping when the thought of Scarlett's heart being inside of Liberty entered his mind. However, he brushed it off. When Liberty gathered her things and was prepared to leave, Poe asked her where she was going, and she didn't really have an answer, so he told her she could stay in the penthouse with him, for a couple of weeks until she figured things out. I can't hardly see this, y'all. I had to get my glasses. Poe eventually set up a meeting with someone from Samad's black book by the name of Blue. They met at an upscale restaurant, and of course Poe brought Rocco, and they both were dressed like rappers when the setting called more for suit and ties. Blue was a potential buyer, and he had done his homework on Poe and Rocco, and he also knew that they were behind Samad's death, being that Samad's estate was under a 24-hour surveillance inside and out. Blue obtained a copy of the tape and made no copies. He gave the tape to Poe. They negotiated prices, then Blue schooled them on how business was done on this level. He basically told him how to dress, to always bring his woman instead of his right hand, and to act like he was a boss instead of a street hustler. When Poe returned to the penthouse, he found Liberty in the bathroom staring at her scars. He ran her some bath water and washed her scars. They talked a little bit more about her past, and she revealed, a little bit more about herself. Poe had a feeling that Liberty had Scarlett's heart in her chest, and he was determined to find out. And if it was, he was never going to let Liberty walk out of his life. Liberty talked for hours about Liberty's past. She told him everything she went through, starting from Sierra Leone. She thought that he would judge her, but instead he was drawn closer to her and admired her even more. Once they were done with breakfast, they went shopping because he wanted them to look the part for the meeting that was scheduled for later that night. Poe and Liberty hung out like old friends while shopping. Later, they went to a meeting at a Russian couple's house to discuss business over dinner. Things went exceptionally well. Poe was so impressed by Liberty that he took her to the beach afterwards, and they ended up kissing. Soon thereafter, Poe revealed to Liberty about how he had lost Scarlett and that she was an organ donor. Liberty didn't take the news well and eventually ended up storming off. She eventually returned to the penthouse to face a worried Poe. They talked and smoothed things over, then went off to their separate rooms. Secretly, Liberty thanked Scarlett for her heart and was starting to think that Scarlett and Ashai was the force pushing her and Poe towards one another. Poe ended up going to one of their trap houses that Rocco held down. There, Poe noticed one of their workers, Little Mikey, had a look of shystiness, and Poe made a mental note to watch him. Later, Poe got a phone call from Castro, but hung up on him, wondering how randoms got his number. Then Castro, who was a Mexican kingpin, and leader of the Los Familia, sent his goons to deliver a message to Poe. About 4 of them showed up, claiming to have come in peace. They told Poe that Castro had sent them to tell Poe he had to pay taxes in order to set up shop out there in Cali. Of course, Poe refused, and Rocco and their goons shot up all of Castro's goons except the leader. They left him alive so that he could relay the message to Castro. Rocco and Poe had just waged war and were preparing for combat. Back at the penthouse, Liberty had cooked steak, potatoes, and broccoli. Then her and Poe ate, which then led to another kiss, and then that led to an evening of pleasure. Afterwards, Poe asked her more about her childhood. Then Liberty requested that they visit Sierra Leone so that she could get some closure. Of course, Poe agreed because both of them were still healing. Next morning, when Liberty and Poe woke up, they heard someone entering their suite. It was red flags for Poe because he had given the concierge strict orders not to let anyone up in the suite without notifying him. Poe jumped to his feet and grabbed his gun, and then saw a startled Mexican who spoke no English. She was a maid entering the room with a cart full of sheets. He apologized and told her they were good on sheets, and as soon as he turned to go back in the bedroom, he heard the maid cock her gun. So he waited for his death. However, he heard Rocco ask the maid who sent her, and he was the one with the gun cocked to her head. After being slammed against the wall and almost choked to death, she finally answered and said that Castro sent her. He was the leader of Los Familia, and this was her initiation. Poe gave Rocco orders to make an example out of old girl. So he dumped her in the cart she came in with and headed out with her. Meanwhile, Liberty and Poe decided to pack up and head to Africa. They were out of coke anyway, and Poe didn't like the fact that his enemy knew where he slept. Rocco ended up taking the girl from the Los Familia to the Hollywood sign. He had on a ski mask, and he stuffed a note in the girl's mouth and duct taped her mouth closed, put a noose around her neck, and pushed her from the H of the Hollywood sign. Seconds later, she was swinging like a pendulum. Rocco dropped Poe and Liberty off at the airport. Upon their departure, Poe expressed to Rocco that the way he handled old girl was over the top and sent a message to the world instead of just to Castro. Rocco stated that was the point. He also did not want to join them in Africa because he wanted to keep everyone in line in LA. He flew for about 22 hours and then landed in Freetown, which was very urban and similar to the cities in the States. And later they found a cab driver who was brave enough to take them to Liberty's old village of Dunku. They had to pay him $500 though. Once there, they went through Liberty's old village, which was different than she remembered. They ended up checking into a rundown hostel. They ended up with a tiny room that offered them the bare minimum, and the bathroom was dirty. The plan was to look for Liberty's cousin, Dahlia. Poe and Liberty walked the village and asked everyone they saw about Dahlia. No one claimed to know who she was. Liberty was losing hope, and she and Poe both were getting tired as the sun was about to set. So they finally headed back to the hostel and were asleep within minutes from the long day of walking in the sun. The next morning, they were awakened by armed men who appeared to be robbing them. The man with no gun was yelling in his native tongue, so Poe nor Liberty knew what was being said. Poe tried to explain to the men that Liberty was from the village. That's when the man without a gun spoke English and told Poe he was lying. Liberty took over and told him who her father and mother was, and the man knew exactly who Liberty was. He told his men to stand down, and he began to explain to Poe and Liberty that his name was Omega and that this was his village and he had to protect it from the rebels. He also told Liberty that Dahlia was his wife and that she and Poe could stay at their home instead of in the rundown hostel. Once at Omega's estate on top of the mountain overlooking the village, Liberty and Dahlia were reunited and were off getting reacquainted. They were there about 2 weeks when Omega and Poe discovered they were in the same line of business. Being that Poe was in a drought and needed a connect, and Omega had access to the purest coke and coca fields, they both wanted to start a business relationship. However, Omega had to run it by Zulu first, the head honcho in charge. After getting the okay from Zulu, Omega explained to Poe how they got the coke to the States. He told Poe he would have to pick it up in the port of Miami. It was delivered on a ship called Murderville, and that a white lady by the name of Miss Beth would be the point of contact. He also assured Poe that they were all family in this business, and if someone had a problem with him, they had a problem with them. Liberty stayed in Sierra Leone with Dahlia, and Dahlia pretty much told her that Poe was a good man and that she held a certain type of power with him. Liberty wanted to live in Sierra Leone forever, now being that it was a flourishing community. Poe and the African Mafia came back to the States. Ayo and Rocco started out on the wrong foot, but after Poe explained their new position and told him that they were all on the same team, the gentlemen squashed their pettiness. The men then went to the coastline to retrieve their crates from the ship. What Poe wasn't expecting was for humans to be in some of those crates. Ayo explained that the game did not discriminate. They hustled people, drugs, children, guns, and fake handbags. Either way, after testing the product, Poe ordered the goons to unload the crates and to take the product to the warehouse so that they could get to the money. Poe was on top of the world. Business was booming, and he had thoughts of expanding to other districts. Meanwhile, Castro had run out of money, product, and customers, so he decided to hit up his brother-in-law, who was the police commissioner for the city of Los Angeles, whom he had been paying $25,000 per month to keep the cops off of his turf. Of course, brother-in-law Anders wanted to know where his money was for this month, so Castro had to break the news to him that some dude named Poe and some Africans had taken over, and he needed Anders to get rid of them if he wanted to continue getting paid. Anders wasn't trying to get in any deeper, but he was in way too deep and had a lifestyle to uphold. Soon thereafter, Rocco's spot got raided, and Rocco ended up firing back at the cops. However, Rocco got away, and later Poe came to get him. Then the Murderville ship got flagged by customs, so they ended up losing an entire warehouse of product. Then Omega told Poe via Skype to stop this lower level street beef and focus on the bigger picture. Omega was trying to get Poe to realize that he was a supplier and not a hustler anymore. Castro was up and running in no time behind making them lose, all of this work. Liberty flew back to the States and was picked up by Omega's goons. She was on the phone with Poe as they were headed to Beverly Hills, where Poe was waiting to surprise her with their new estate. When her car was shot up, both Africans died, but one managed to say it was Castro before he faded. Liberty was discombobulated, and no one ran to her aid. However, she did hear sirens headed in her direction. Poe was raging hot. He wanted Castro and his whole family executed, and he had given his men orders to have it taken care of by week's end. However, Rocco reminded him that Castro had the cops on his payroll, making it harder for them to touch him. Rocco and Ayo posted up and watched and followed Castro everywhere, and discovered how the police were watching his back. They also discovered that Castro and his boys enjoyed transsexual prostitutes, and one in particular by the name of Trixie. So they followed Trixie home and propositioned her, offering her $5,000 for every member of the Los Familia she could deliver to them. Trixie decided to plan a coochie party. That way the men would come unarmed. The plan actually worked. Trixie delivered and got up out of there when the gunplay began. Omega was furious with Poe when he found out that Poe went against his orders. He was really testing Poe so that he could move him into the diamond business where the real money was at. Meanwhile, Dahlia was wishing she had the freedom that Liberty had. Omega treated her as somewhat of a prisoner. She couldn't even have her own thoughts. Omega and Poe were culturally different, and Dahlia longed for that. Either way, she had to plant seeds and manipulate Omega to make him feel like he actually came up with the ideas Dahlia brought to him. By the end of the night, Omega had given Dahlia orders to pack her things so that she could fly to LA to keep an eye on Poe and to be Omega's checks and balances system. Dahlia never traveled anywhere without her husband and was eager to explore the freedom and also to make it permanent. Dahlia made it to LA and was once again reunited with her cousin. They made plans to hang out after Dahlia handled business with Poe. Liberty brought Dahlia back to their estate. She was greeted by Poe, who eventually showed her her guest suite so that she could rest after her long flight. Rocco and Ayo went to get their shipment, and to Poe's surprise, it wasn't coke but diamonds. The men devised the plans to sell to the Arabs using the ladies, Liberty and Dahlia, and Rocco had a third girl he wanted to add to the game. When Dahlia and Liberty returned to the estate after a day of shopping on Rodeo Drive, they entered the mansion, interrupting a meeting Poe, Rocco, and Ayo were having about the diamonds. Poe told the ladies to join them. He then began to tell them about the plan, but Liberty wasn't trying to hear it. Poe knew she didn't like blood diamonds. So her and Poe got into an argument. Soon someone was at the door. It was the third girl, who happened to be Trixie, Liberty's old friend from the Murderville sex trafficking. They were happy to see each other. They hugged. Then Liberty asked her why was she there. Trixie told her, and then Liberty headed upstairs, still pissed with Poe. The men told Trixie and Dahlia to get acquainted. Then he broke down the plans for them and went over their compensation. Trixie was in and agreed to the 20%, then headed to find Liberty. Meanwhile, Dahlia was left to negotiate further with Poe and wanted 30%, while being flirtatious and licking her lips before walking away. Rocco and Ayo warned Poe that he needed to watch Dahlia because she seemed like the type to break up a happy home. When Trixie found Liberty, she was still livid with Poe and was throwing up in a trash can. Trixie apologized for taking Liberty's money that was stashed back in the day. Of course, Liberty wasn't tripping. The ladies caught up and chit-chatted briefly, then Trixie headed out. Liberty decided the next morning, after waking up to an empty bed, that she wasn't going to stay with Poe. Then she ran to throw up again. After that, she packed her things and got some money out of the safe. When she walked out of the room, she bumped into Dahlia, who was wearing a kimono-style robe that was extremely short and had her cleavage pushed up to her chin. Dahlia pretended to act concerned for her cousin, but really was glad she was leaving because she wanted to be Poe's queen. And Dahlia walked in the airport together, but went in separate directions as if they didn't even know one another. Dahlia got her diamonds through TSA by hiding them in a pill bottle. Trixie got her diamonds through by hiding them in her massive bun. Once in New York, Dahlia headed to the Diamond District to meet with Ahmad. She got the sale plus a little extra for her services. Trixie met up with Mr. Hunter, who was trying to get Trixie to join him for dinner, but Trixie let him know that he was barking up the wrong tree. Out of nervousness, Mr. Hunter speeded up the process of the deal, wanted to get all the way from around Trixie. Poe was told to bring Liberty a duffel bag of money because Poe wanted to be a man of his word. He had told Liberty earlier in their relationship that if she decided to leave him, he would still make sure she would always be taken care of. Rocco also told Liberty that she needed to go back home because Poe was a good dude. Poe was in his office when Dahlia returned to the mansion from her trip. Poe was leaving a message for Liberty when Dahlia walked in. She convinced Poe to come celebrate with her for the $1 million they made off of the diamonds. At first, Poe was reluctant, but then gave in because he was lonely. They dressed up, went to an upscale restaurant, and got tipsy. Poe told Dahlia that Omega was a lucky man to have her because she understood the game. And Dahlia told Poe she wasn't happy with Omega. They spent that night acting as a couple, and at one point were about to kiss until the waiter interrupted. Poe knew then that his judgment was off. They decided to head back to the mansion. Once there, Poe went to his office and Dahlia went to change into some black negligee, then headed to the wine cellar. There, her and Poe ran into one another and she asked him to join her. They ended up drinking the entire bottle. Next thing you know, they were going at it like animals. Dahlia let him know that she would choose him, laying her off on the table. They ended up in Poe's bed for the remainder of the night. The next morning, Liberty had taken a pregnancy test and found out she was pregnant. She was uncertain about what to do or if she should tell Poe, so she ended up calling her cousin Dahlia, who was still in bed with Poe, to come meet her. Dahlia came and Liberty told her the news. Dahlia was shocked and quickly began to fill Liberty's head up with negative thoughts because she knew that Poe would run back to Liberty if he knew she was pregnant. Dahlia was almost to the point she wanted Liberty and the baby whacked just so she could have Poe. She left Liberty in tears. Came to the mansion and was greeted by Dahlia, who was half naked prancing around the mansion. He told her to put on some clothes and have some respect. She was not the same woman he saw when on Omega's arm, and made a note to give Omega a call. He also hoped that Poe hadn't fallen for Dahlia's shenanigans because Omega would mark him a dead man. Ayo knew Dahlia was a snake. Anyway, Ayo had come by to tell Poe about an Asian connect.
CC on the track.
Cause that be natural.
Lady
I ain't
D.
looking tacky. I keep my game tactful.
Yo,
Yeah, I'm so nappy. Cause that be natural.
The infamous.
I ain't looking tacky. Cause I keep my game tactful.
I'm so pretty, I'm so fabu, I'm so natural, it's like it's a taboo. I'm so filthy, got the tattoo, stuck in these bitches like I own ragu. On my business with my platoon, getting these minutes like I'm a typhoon. Y'all is jersey on that cartoon, and I'm sitting on top of these buffoons. I'm so nappy, I'm so nappy. All these dudes that wanna get at me, I'm so cultured and I'm happy. Jealous switches wanna come back me, cause I'm comfortable in my skin. End of the day, you lose, I win. I'm so comfortable in my ends, don't care if I make or lose a few friends, and I look like $1 trillion. Lady D won a lotto, cause in the Lord I trust, and beauty is the motto. Naturally thick in the butt, I'm Billy Blanks on the Tabo. Edges a little rough, just pretend I'm from Morocco. Organ all up in my hair, cause I let my locks grow naturally. My curls popping everywhere, I'm maximizing on this natural thing. Like it or not, I don't care. You clowns ain't about to worry me, cause does this for myself, and I'm repping for my ancestors.